Today I'm going to be talking about the Purcell effect and some calculation of the Purcell factor for some simple systems. So that's the topic of my talk today. So first of all, what is the Purcell effect? So typically when you have any kind of spontaneous emitter, so this any kind of two-level system that can emit photons for your photonic circuits. So typically by themselves in vacuum, they'll have a lifetime of tens of nanoseconds, which is, I mean, as you might realize, this is quite a long time. And if you want to really make photonics competitive with electronics, you want to reduce these lifetimes and increase the emission rate. So one way
Anil,
to do,
sorry for the interruption. So can you speak a little bit louder? So the audio is a little bit low.
uh,
Okay,
okay, sure. Is this better?
it's better now.
Yeah, okay. So today I'm going to be talking about the Purcell effect and I'm going to calculate the Purcell factor for some simple systems. So what is the Purcell effect? So typically spontaneous emitters that we would use in photonics, which can be like two-level systems and atoms and things like that, will have a lifetime of around tens of nanoseconds. So which is, we would like to reduce that, of course, if we want to make photonics competitive with electronics. So one way to do that is using the Purcell effect, which means you can enhance the rate of emission by coupling the emitter to a resonator. And this is E.M. Purcell. He's the guy who discovered the Purcell effect, and he's also a Nobel Prize laureate. Uh, to motivate the Purcell effect, let us look at a radiating dipole from classical electromagnetism. So suppose you have a radiating dipole placed at some position R0. So its dipole moment can be given something like this, and this gives rise to a corresponding current density which looks like this. So now we want to, I mean, the emission rate is directly proportional to how many photons you emit per second. I mean, that is the emission rate is how many photons you emit per second, and that is proportional to the total power that you're emitting. So we want to look at how much power that your radiating dipole really emits. So for that, you can use Poynting's theorem. So this says that the time derivative of the energy density at any point in space, or the negative of that, is given by the divergence of the Poynting vector plus J dot E. So this basically talks about your energy carried in photons, and this talks about your work done by electric field on currents. So to calculate the power emitted, you will of course have to integrate this side over all space. So when you're taking an integral over all space, you're basically taking the surface integral of the Poynting vector at infinity, so that of course becomes zero. And when you take a time average, you get this kind of expression for the total power emitted. And I mean, using this formula, you can simplify it to an expression that looks something like this. So what we really see is that because there's a Dirac delta function, the only, I mean, so the only term that matters is the electric field at the position of the dipole, which is again driving the dipole and causing it to do more work. So if we can enhance this electric field, so that will allow us to extract more power from our dipole. I mean, of course, you'll have to supply it to the dipole indirectly, but I mean, you can get your dipole to emit more power. And so you, when you couple it to a cavity or to any kind of object, what you will get is that there will be some vacuum electric field. This is just the field produced by the dipole at its own location. And on the other hand, you'll also have some contribution of the reflected field. So there's a self effect and there's a reflection effect. And so your total electric field is different from the free space field. And so we can quantify this enhancement in terms of the Purcell factor. It's the Purcell factor is simply the ratio of the spontaneous emission rate with your cavity divided by the spontaneous emission rate in vacuum. So if you want to enhance your source, you would like to have a Purcell factor greater than 1, and your E dash field should be in phase with your vacuum field so that they add together. And on the other hand, you can also think about having a Purcell factor less than 1 if you want to store a photon in an excited state of some atom or something, in which case your E dash field should be out of phase with the vacuum field. So now now one point to note is that this Purcell factor is actually an intrinsic property of the cavity. It's not really dependent what kind of emitter you're using. And you can see that in this formula, uh, there's no terms from the emitter itself. And I mean, we are going to look at this formula in more detail now. So another way to understand the Purcell effect is that when you increase the density of states into which you can emit a photon, then your transition probability or emission probability will actually increase proportionately. This is intuitively. If you want to have a look at solid physics, this is Fermi's golden rule, which basically says the same thing. And here what we are talking about is so this zeta is essentially the cos theta term, the angle between the cos of the angle between the dipole and the electric field, and the total density of states is of course the density of states of the atom, which won't change by putting it anywhere, of course, and the density multiplied by the density of states of the photon. So this will give you the total density of states, and so that's something that we can change. So for example, in free space, your density of states is simply given like this. So this is something you will find in any classical physics textbook, any good text on preliminary statistical mechanics. So this is the same thing that you do by you take the free space like a big box with, uh, you take it like a particle in a box, and you make the box very big, and you get this kind of density of states. Whereas for a cavity, we can have any kind of profile of the density of state. So for now, I'm going to be considering a Lorentzian profile, which looks something like this. This is the plot. So omega c is the central frequency, and delta omega c is the width at full width at half maximum. So from based on that, you can get this kind of thing. So this is basically a Lorentzian function, and you would want to normalize it so that the integral over all frequencies of g of omega should be 1. So that gives you this prefactor, and you are dividing by v because you want the density in space, so you need to divide by the volume. So now if you are putting an atom which is tuned to this cavity, you will actually have omega equal to omega c, and so you can put that into this expression. This term just vanishes, and you get the simplified density of states. uh, and so this is first thing that's changing. The second thing is this is a matter of convention really, but in free space, your cos theta term you'll average over all directions, so you will basically integrate it and take the average. So that gives you an average value of 1/3, whereas a resonator coupled to a resonant mode, you can just take zeta equal to 1, because you're making sure that it's well coupled. So based on that, your ratio or the Purcell factor is simply given by this ratio, and which you can calculate to be actually equal to this thing, which is your Purcell factor. Now, what's really important to note is that the Purcell factor is really proportional to Q over V. I mean, this is a prefactor. It's most important for you to take away that your Purcell factor is proportional to Q over V. So having us look at this term, look at these terms, what is Q and what is V. So Q is your quality factor, which is given by your total power stored in your cavity divided by the average power dissipated for oscillations times 2 pi. So, or in other words, average power dissipated per radian of oscillation. So in case of a Lorentzian cavity, you can also see that it also satisfies this expression. So that's what we really put in here. That's how we got the Q. The other thing is your volume can be taken as the mode volume, so it's given by this kind of expression. So this is this kind of represents the volume that your photon can actually exist within, but this is a measure of that. But as you can see, this is practically very hard to measure. So for practical purposes, we can take that the mode volume and the physical volume are the same. But as we will see, the mode volume actually crops up naturally in one of the further derivations that we are going to look at. So I mean, you can just check that dimensionally. This as the dimension of a volume. So now I'm going to be consider two kinds of resonator cavities. So first of all, you can take a dielectric resonator cavity, and you can take a plasmonic nanostructure, and we'll have a look at each of these. First of all, we'll take up the dielectric resonator. So in a dielectric resonator, this will be like some kind of a column, or will be some kind of a nanostructure which you can fabricate out of some dielectric. And generally, you won't have lots of losses in the dielectric structure, so you can have quite large values of Q factors, so of the order of 10⁵, 4 is easily feasible. But your problem is that your volume has to be at least this much, because to form a mode, you'll take at least lambda by 2 n distance in each direction. So this is your limiting factor, so you can't really do much about the volume. Another factor for this kind of cavity is that it's not enough that your emitter should emit a photon, it should also exit your system overall. So that means that you'll have a out of cavity rate which you're actually interested in, not just the emission rate of the emitter. So that will be given by this kind of expression. So if you remember how Q was related to the power dissipation, you'll see that you can get some kind of expression like this. N is the total number of photons inside the cavity, and omega by Q we'll write as gamma cavity. So now we can guess what the optimal kind of Q value should be. So what we can think is that your optimal value of Q can be achieved when your spontaneous emission rate is the same as your cavity emission rate. So whenever you produce a new photon, the previous one just leaves just at that time, and you have this kind of stable. I mean, you don't have any bottleneck. So based on that, you can calculate your optimal Q guess value as this value. So we just want to check that this is a feasible value. So if we put some numbers, so we can take the an emitter for demonstration purpose. We take an emitter which has a emission wavelength of 1000 nanometers, and we can take a emitter that emits once every 10 nanoseconds. And if you put these numbers into this formula, you'll get a Q value of about 5500. So as I mentioned, you can get even much higher than this. So this is definitely a feasible Q value. So, but one of the important things that we have been assuming so far implicitly is something called a weak coupling regime. So we are saying that we are considering that the emitter is quantized, so there's discrete two levels and so on. But we are not really considering any kind of quantization of the field. So, so this is valid in the regime when your spontaneous emission rate is much smaller than gamma cavity. But in our earlier condition, we put that both of them are the same. So our analysis is not rock solid in that case. So we can actually perform a more detailed analysis in the strong coupling regime. So in this regime, what we are going to look at is, so how do you quantize the electromagnetic field? So I mean, the theory is kind of involved, so I'm not going to really be talking much about how you get that, but just to give you an intuition, your energy density at any point in space, the electromagnetic energy density will be given by this expression. And if you look at the total energy of your harmonic oscillator at any point, that will of course be given by this expression. So you can see how they are very analogous. And this analogy kind of suggests that your raising and lowering operators for your simple harmonic oscillator, which you might have seen in any fundamental quantum mechanics course, are somehow going to get involved. So the exact Hamiltonian was proposed by Jaynes and Cummings in the Jaynes-Cummings model. So we look at this in more detail. So their model basically talks about atom placed inside a cavity which has some resonance frequency omega c. And our atom is a two-level system. So there's a ground state, there's an excited state, and the energy difference corresponds to a frequency of about omega a. So if you put this, so what are the terms of this Hamiltonian? So you have a first term h cross omega c a dagger. This term talks about the energy of the photons that exist within the cavity. There's a second term which relates to your atom. So that this is really talking about whether your electron is in the excited or the ground state. So this describes your energy of the atom, and this is an interaction term. So this talks about how your atom can interact with the cavity field. And so sigma z is basically the poly z operator, if you know about it. And this is the operator that raises the atom state, and this is a lowering state. And you'll see that you can either emit a you can either absorb a photon and excite the atom, or you can emit a photon and de-excite the atom. And this omega is something important. It's called the Rabi frequency. It's given by this expression. This comes when you do a proper formal derivation of the Jaynes-Cummings model. So what we want to really analyze is you're taking an atom in the E0 state. So you have an excited atom, there's no photons in the cavity initially. And we want to see how this state will evolve with time and how quickly it will emit and so on. For that, we are going to use the Schrodinger's equation with this Hamiltonian put here. And in general, we can take a general state as in this form. So as you can see, x of t is, or mod x of t the whole squared is the probability of an atom being excited and there being no photons within the cavity. And y of t mod of y of t squared is giving you the probability of your photon being in the ground state, and your atom being in the ground state and your photon, there being a photon in the cavity. And this is just something that's introduced for calculation simplification. So I mean, this is of course modulus equal to 1, so this is not affecting your probability. So we can apply this Schrodinger's equation to this, and we can expand this out properly. So in this, so far we are not really considering anything exiting from the cavity, but we'll adjust for that later. So if you put that into the Schrodinger equation, and do your calculations properly, you'll get a differential equation system that looks like this. You can see this is a oscillator system because d squared x by dt squared is basically I omega by 2 times dy by dt, which is again I omega by 2. So this is like minus omega squared by 4x. This is your simple harmonic oscillator. Similarly in y also. So this is what you really call Rabi oscillation, and based on that you also have the, I mean, if you look at this again, so mod x squared is representing the probability that our atom is in an excited state, and mod y squared is the probability that you'll have a photon inside the cavity. So if you so if you remember, our emission rate was proportional to the number of photons, which is proportional to mod y squared. So in y, if you look at how it evolves exponentially, you'll see that this 2 factor is justified. And so you modify your differential equations by adding this cavity loss term to this system, and then you can solve it by putting your initial conditions, and this is the solution. So of course this looks kind of dolty and you can't really see what's happening, so you can plot it out, or rather you can plot out mod x squared, mod y squared, and mod z squared. This is when you have a very small cavity emission rate. So what's happening is that you're still getting these oscillations in both mod x squared, mod y squared, and z is basic mod z squared is basically the probability of having a photon outside the cavity. So that's like slowly increasing. On the other hand, you can also look at so you can also look at this case where they are kind of balanced. The value is 1.4. We'll come to the significance of this value slightly later. But what you can see is that your state decays immediately. There's a probability that you're having a photon inside the cavity for some time, and then that also dies out, and your probability outside just increases. And this case, for very large value, you will not have any kind of oscillations or any probability that your photon is inside the cavity. In fact, there's almost no probability, and you're almost immediately going to emit a photon after you're immediately going to emit it after the atom emits it. So there's no time wasted in the cavity here. So this is the so one way to estimate the area, the lifetime, is by taking an area under this curve. This is basically 1 minus z squared. So the probability of there not being an atom outside, and this is just a process, something like how you calculate your expected value from a probability distribution function. So if you look at it here, you have a large area, you have a comparatively large area, and you have a smaller area here. So this suggests that this is kind of your Goldilocks value. So basically at this Goldilocks value, you can again see that by the time about t equal to 2 pi, you're definitely having a photon outside the cavity. So that's your Rabi time, and based on that, you can take the out of cavity rate as 1 over t Rabi, which again, putting in correct numbers, evaluates to 54 gigahertz. And so basically this is a graph of your lifetime, again calculated as an area under the curve, and 1.4 happens to be the minimum, so that's why we had that value there. And so your optimal Q value is actually your optimal guess value upon 1.4, so the guess value that we calculated earlier. So you can see that this is still within the achievable limits and something you can actually do. The next type of resonator that I'm going to be looking at is something called a plasmonic nanoparticle. So what we are talking about is you have an atom here and you have a small particle of some metal, maybe silver, gold, something like that, where your size can be very, very small even as compared to the wavelength. And the way this works is your atom oscillates the electromagnetic field. So this electromagnetic field will start oscillating electrons within this. So your electron cloud will get distorted. And so this will start radiating by itself, so that you have a reflected electric field again at the position of the emitter. And that means that you can enhance your rate. So we are going to analyze using the Drude model, which basically says that electrons don't interact with any other particles within this nanoparticle except by colliding. So the collision rate is of the order of 10⁻12 per second for most metals, and this will lead to losses, and you'll limit the Q factor, but your advantage is that your volume can be significantly smaller. So when we want to analyze with this, what we do is we apply a driving field to this particle and see how your electrons can get displaced because of this driving field. Based on that, you'll see that this is just something analogous to your harmonic oscillator. So you can take your total energy of oscillation in terms of the addition of harmonic oscillator energies over all electrons, and this evaluates to this expression. So your omega p is the plasma frequency. It's given by this expression. This is standard result from the Ruder model calculated by Landau, and n is the average free electron density here. So you can see how there's an n factor and there's a volume integral. So that's accounting for all electrons. On the other hand, you can also calculate the amplitude of what kind of dipole moment you're obtaining. So that's just this integral, and based on that, you can calculate its square, of course, and you're getting this expression. Now you remember this integral e d cubed r squared, and you also have this integral e squared dr. So you can see where the effective mode volume that I defined earlier is coming in, and why we needed to really look at that. And just for convenient notation, we use lambda p is the Plasmon wavelength, which is just this is just a convention, notational convention. So now we'll assume that the particle volume is small, so that you can actually treat it like a pure dipole, and your radiative dissipation rate you will model as radiated power is gamma radiation times u. So this gamma radiation is analogous to your gamma cavity from the other case, and using your radiating dipole formula from classical electromagnetism, you have that the radiated power is given by this, which is gamma rad times u. You divide by u and so on, and you'll get the radiation rate as this. One thing that will change from the other case to here is that you actually have to include the effects of both radiative losses in the sense that you're actually emitting, so you're losing from the particle, as well as electron collision energy losses. So your Q factor has to be actually divided by this factor, not only gamma ray, as you would do usually. So this would also modify our spontaneous emission rate. It would actually be the Purcell factor times gamma naught times this factor, because only the radiated losses are useful to you. So it reduces by this fraction, of course. So even though your emitter emits more frequently, some of it just gets lost. And you can substitute all values from this formula. You can substitute the Q value we saw earlier, gamma ray that we saw earlier. And based on that, you have the spontaneous emission rate given like this. So now you can you want to substitute some values and get an order of magnitude of what's happening. So you take your radiation rate approximately equal to gamma m. This is just this is just an arbitrary value that I'm putting in. Of course, it depends on several factors, as we saw earlier. And I'm also going to put in omega p as this. So these are the actual values for silver. And I'm just going to take the background index as 1. So you get a gamma spontaneous emission rate of about 4.4 terahertz, which, if you recall, is much better than our 54 gigahertz rate that we saw earlier. Now we'll come to the Purcell effect in waveguide. So in a waveguide also, your density of states is enhanced because we are confining the photon in 2 directions. So in this case, your Purcell factor is given by this slightly different expression, comes similarly. And Ng is your group refractive index, and A is the effective mode area, again the critical term, analogous to Q over V. So now if you look at a dielectric waveguide, so you'll again have your restriction on the mode area similar to your cavity, and your Ng also cannot be too high, because first of all you'll slow down the pulse, you'll increase losses, and also there's a practical limit on how much you can increase it. So that means that your Purcell factor is actually limited to like 30. We'll see that we can, this is definitely not satisfactory. So we'll see if we can increase this using some kind of plasmonic structures. Now the thing is, based on our previous analysis, it seems like a good idea to use plasmonic waveguides. But if you take a plasmonic structure, you cannot really support any volume modes, because they'll decay out very fast. There's very high losses in plasmonics, as we saw earlier, based on electron collisions. So you can't really make a entire volume mode in a plasmonic. But you can use something called a surface plasmon polariton, or SPP modes. So that means that you'll take a dielectric on top, you'll take a plasmonic material or metal on the bottom, and you can have this kind of mode which is supported just at the interface. So we can analyze that by setting up a proper coordinate system. We can and we are going to consider a kind of TM mode. So we are going to say that the EY is 0, So then we can write the expression for the electric field something like this at a general x, z, and t. And we can apply Gauss theorem to it. We know that there's no charge densities, free charge densities accumulated anywhere. So you can relate your z and x components this way, and you can put the proper boundary conditions from electromagnetism at this boundary interface, and you'll get this value for KSPP. Now the important thing to note is that first of all, from this boundary condition and this thing, you'll actually see that your epsilon m has to be negative. So in the case of Drude model, that actually becomes possible if you do the calculations, and uh, in fact you need the real part of epsilon m to be less than negative of epsilon d, which is a necessary condition for this kind of mode to be feasible. So now what will happen is in SPP waveguides, you can actually have quite large losses, which you can model using the equation gamma out. I mean, this is the output rate, which decays exponentially. And this of course depends on the imaginary part of KSPP. So in case I didn't mention it earlier, so KSPP is basically our wave number. It represents the wavelength along x direction. So if you have an imaginary part to that, then that represents a decay along the x direction. So based on that, you can get this expression. And so this means that your SPP modes are not really very good at getting higher output emissions, but we can again find a better solution. So the better solution in this case is something called a gap surface plasmon. So the idea is you sandwich a dielectric layer between two metallic layers, and you have the two surface waves SPP modes interacting with each other. In other words, your most of your mode will actually be confined to the dielectric, and because of the metal, you can actually confine it more tightly, and so you can get a better density of states and so on. In this case, we can, and because it's localized within the dielectric, your losses will be comparatively minimized. So we are just, this is just convenient notation, and again the analysis for EM fields is somewhat similar to the one that I did earlier, but I'm not going to do it here. So this is just the final result that I'm presenting here. So you can, I mean, this is of course a dirty expression. This is KDM, and you also have a hyperbolic tangent and so on. But you can solve this numerically, or you can make some approximations for KGSP. In our case, we'll use the later approach. So KGSP is again your wave number and so on. So one assumption that I didn't really specify out loud is that your extent in y direction should be infinite. So of course we don't have infinite really, but if your thickness is much smaller than your extent in the y direction or w, then you can take that as your approximate solution. And if we set the y direction thing to lambda GSP by 2, because I mean you're forming a mode again. So and you take t much less than lambda GSP, then that those conditions are, everything is satisfied. And based on simplifying this expression with approximations, you'll get that your KGSP is given by something like this, and you can calculate lambda GSP as 2 pi by KGSP. And again, substituting that in our expression for Purcell factor for a waveguide, you get this kind of expression. I mean, now you might be wondering where this lambda p really came from, but this lambda p actually comes in from the Drude model. So I was talking about how that predicts a negative, potentially a negative epsilon m. So this is the exact formula for epsilon m, and you can see that this can become negative for certain values of omega. And simplifying it correctly, you can get this expression. And if you put the values for silver with a thickness of 4 nanometers in this expression, you'll get a Purcell factor of about 144, which is much better than the factor of 30 that we had gotten earlier. So in conclusion, we have seen how we can use dielectric and plasmonic devices to obtain higher emission rates. And we have seen how plasmonic devices can actually perform better than your dielectric devices in general. And with that, I come to an end of my talk. Thanks for having me here. And